On the 12th of January 2019, last year, I started this on a journey through a book. The book is called Genesis. The word means beginning. It comes at the beginning of a collection of books that we call the Bible. The first words are in the beginning. And what I have found, I hope what we found as we've journeyed through this one book in a big collection of books, is that this collection itself has turned out to not be a book, but a collection of songs, parables, hymns, poems, and stories that don't seem to be all that interested in beginnings or origins or how we all got here. Instead, what we have is a collection of stories, songs, poems, hymns that remind certain people who their God is. What the whole creation project was always about. And what place human beings have in that story. What human beings are made for. We are 66 weeks later, nearing the end of the story. The next few weeks we will finish up as we look at the story of a man called Joseph. Joseph is one in a line of a family. This has been a set of stories about family, about promises, about love, and about blessing. Joseph was introduced to us as a 17-year-old. Basically a spoiled brat. So spoiled that he wound his brothers up to the point where they wanted to kill him. He narrowly escapes that as they decide to instead sell him into slavery. And so he ends up at the start of our story today, a slave in a place called Egypt, owned by a man called Potiphar, who is an official in the court of the Pharaoh, the ruler of the Egyptian empire. Joseph seems in a bleak place. But these stories are inspired. They are, as we've seen, Jewish works of art, brought together at a time when the Jewish people faced chaos and crisis and wanted to remember who their God was, what the creation was always about, and what they were made to be. Joseph is in a dark place, but throughout this story, like a great song, there is a recurring theme, a chorus, a riff. And the phrase that goes along with Joseph being in this situation is, "The Lord was with Joseph." The Lord was with Joseph. And despite being in slavery in Egypt, things actually go well. Within this household, he shows his worth as he looks after things, as he takes charge of things. His master sees that blessing is on the situation. Now, we might look at the story and think, well, this is a story about God choosing someone and then blessing him. Or a story about someone behaving in the right way, following a God to the point where the God rewards them. The funny thing is, in this story, that's not what the story's about. Instead, the blessing is on the whole of Potiphar's household, everyone and everything in it. And the blessing does come by means of Joseph being there, but the blessing is not for Joseph. Joseph is part of how the blessing comes. Joseph was made to be part of bringing the blessing. The blessing's not for Joseph. It's not a reward. This is what he was made for. Not everyone is happy. The next character in the story is Mrs Potiphar. Mrs Potiphar knows who she is. She's in charge. She owns everything in the household, particularly Joseph. She likes what she sees in Joseph and she demands that he come to bed with her. Now, this story might seem to be about infidelity. It might seem to be about temptation. It might seem to be about the interplay or the power play between men and women. But I don't think that's the focus here. Instead, I think that Mrs. Potiphar represents her culture, her empire. She and her servants and her husband represent the empire of the time. And that empire was about grabbing. It was about controlling. It was about consuming. It was about having power and wielding power over those around us. It was about putting yourself at the centre and taking what you wanted. Mrs. Potiphar is just a symbol of that empire. And the empire wants what it owns, Joseph. The story tells us that Joseph refused. Now, he refused actually quite politely. In his situation, he really risked death by saying no to any of his masters. But he gives a few different good reasons why this is not a good idea, and he refuses. He resists the empire. This doesn't go down well. Mrs. Potiphar is relentless. Day after day, she presses him and pushes him and tries to wear him down to the point where she eventually lashes out violently and tries to take what she believes is hers. And he narrowly escapes, leaving just his coat behind. We've heard about Joseph and a coat before. Mrs. Potiphar then reacts to the whole situation that she's got herself in. She brings the servants together and they use a phrase that we recognise so much. That foreigner did this. He always meant ill to this household. She confronts her husband. That foreigner that you brought. We've heard that language so many times. Despite this being an ancient story, it rings true. Blaming the outsider for something that we have caused. We're told that her husband, Potiphar, burned with anger. He burned with anger. Anger with Joseph for what he has allegedly done to his wife? I'm not so sure. Because if he was really angry, well, the penalty was death for this kind of crime. I think Potiphar is angry because he was onto a good thing. The blessing came onto his household, everything in it and every one in it because of Joseph. And now he has to put his best possession into the household prison. This is not a story about morality. This is not a story about resisting temptation. This is not a story about men and women and infidelity. This is a story about resisting the empire. And as it closes with Joseph in prison, a huge obstacle now being in the way of him bringing the blessing that he was made to bring, that riff, that chorus, comes back into the story again and again. In prison, the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. As the dream, Joseph carries the dream, moves forward and is resisted as the empire strikes back, there is still a hope. The hope in the dream, the hope in the promise, the hope in the blessing. And as much as the empire lashes out and tries to stop this, the melody, the chorus, the riff carries on. The Lord was with Joseph. This story is not over. This is not a morality story. This is not a fairy tale story where everything goes right for those who follow God. There are very few of those in these scriptures. This is a reality story. That life involves risk. That following the way God made us to be involves resisting the empire. And the empire will not be happy about that. But God is with every single one of us as we respond deep in our bones to what we were made to be and to do, to be part of bringing the blessing. Jesus of Nazareth, in his life and in his death, in his resurrection, lived out resistance to this kind of empire, lived out life in all its fullness, took away the barriers that get in the way of bringing the blessing. And as he challenged his followers to be part of this creation project, he said to them, I am with you always to the very end. The great Jewish songbook, the Psalms, has so many inspirational songs and poems and hymns, and one that's incredibly familiar to us is in Psalm 23, where we repeat, or we often sing, Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? Because God takes away the evil? Because God helps us avoid the valley? Because God takes us round about our troubles? No, because you are with me. The empire doesn't like it, but you and I are never alone.